Hello and welcome to Ukraine this week. I'm Janusz Rewiński, standing in for Donna Arleth, who is currently in Georgia reporting on the ongoing protests there. In any case, let's take a look now at today's topics. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinkin reassured Ukraine of enduring American support during his surprise visit to Kiev this week. Blinken's visit comes at a critical time as Russia intensifies its assaults in the eastern regions of the country.
Blinken's arrival marks a significant milestone, as he became the first senior U.S. official to visit Ukraine following the passage of $61 billion military aid package by the U.S. Congress last month.
We're rushing ammunition, armored vehicles, missiles, air defenses, rushing them to get to the front lines, to protect soldiers, to protect civilians. And on air defenses, as Dmytro said, this is, of course, a top priority.
This package, long delayed, signifies a renewed determination to bolster Ukraine's capabilities. The urgency of the situation was palpable, as Blinken's visit coincided with Russia's ground incursion into the northern region of Kharkiv, further escalating tensions and stretching Ukraine's military resources thin.
Because in the end, we have seen it hundreds of times. When a Ukrainian infantryman or artilleryman has everything that he or she needs, we are winning.
It's so good to see you. Wonderful to be back.
President Zelensky, in discussions with Blinken, emphasized the urgent need for air defense supplies to protect civilians and soldiers from Russian aerial assaults.
We need today 2 Patriots for Kharkiv region, because the people are under attack, civilians and warriors, everybody, they're under Russian missiles.
And the free world is with you too.
Looking ahead, experts to expedite arms deliveries to Ukraine are underway. In Kyiv, Blinken finished his visit in a rather unusual manner, playing Neil Young's Rocking the Free World, a rock anthem released just before the fall of the Berlin Wall.
In a rather surprising move, Vladimir Putin has appointed his longtime aide Andrey Belousov to the position of defense minister. Putin's surprise tapping of Belousov to run the ministry indicates that the president wants a major shift in the handling of his 2-year invasion of Ukraine.
Vladimir Putin's recent overhaul of the Russian government's military and security leadership has sent shockwaves among observers. The reshuffle involves key figures being moved to new positions, with notable changes within both the military and civilian spheres. At the forefront of these changes is the appointment of Andrey Belousov as the new Minister of Defense, replacing longtime Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu, who has been reassigned to the powerful position of Secretary of the National Security Council.
From the outside, actually very difficult to judge what may be the real reasons for this reshuffle behind the scenes, because we know that there are different clans in the Kremlin, and this may be just a balancing of internal clans or camps, and has very little to do with the rational organization of the Russian state apparatus.
Belousov's appointment as a Minister of Defense comes as a surprise to many observers, given his background in economics. Some analysts suggest that Putin's decision reflects a strategic shift towards integrating military spending more effectively into Russia's overall economy.
Russia is moving almost its entire economy onto military lines. It will be a militaristic country, and its economy will be built exclusively due to military production.
But the true meaning and complexities of the cabinet reshuffle are not that clear, and the results of the charade in Kremlin will be visible soon.
A shocking incident unfolded in Slovakia on Wednesday as Prime Minister Robert Fico was targeted in a brazen assassination attempt, leaving the nation in disbelief and political turmoil. The alleged assailant now faces charges of attempted murder.
The attack occurred in broad daylight as Prime Minister Fico mingled with supporters. The assailant fired 5 shots at close range, striking Fico in the stomach and arm, catching his security detail off guard. The detained suspect is known to have participated in anti-government protests. He told police the attack was motivated by his dissatisfaction with recent political developments, particularly the outcome of the presidential election in Slovakia. The shooting has prompted widespread condemnation, with many in Slovakia labeling it as an assault on democracy. The political landscape in Slovakia has been fraught with tension, exacerbated by the contentious issues such as the Fico administration's divisive foreign policy and proposed reforms to the public broadcaster.
We have to ask the people not to fight against each other only because they have other political view or something like that, and we have to stop this high and very huge tension in our society.
International leaders immediately reacted to the news and offered their support to Fico in Slovakia.
This is a totally unacceptable act of violence. I wish Mr. Prime Minister a speedy recovery, and it is important that the attacker be held accountable for his actions. No form of violence, and especially political violence, should ever be a part of people's existence.
Elected in September 2023 on a populist Ukraine skeptic platform, Fico halted arms supplies from Slovakia's military stocks and has repeatedly criticized both defense assistance for Ukraine and sanctions against Russia. Fico has since expressed support for Ukraine's accession to the EU.
And now, as always, it's time for our weekly update from the Ukrainian front lines. We'll be bringing you the latest assessment of the situation there, including the issues that are currently faced by the Ukrainian defenders. Now, let's take a glance at the map of Ukraine first, and we give an overview of what's going on. As you can see, as always, the regions illegally occupied by Russia are marked in red. And now, in the Donetsk region lies the town of Pokrovsk, and the Pokrovsk sector generally has seen some heavy fighting. Let's take a look now at what the situation really is. Now, obviously, this has involved some Russian assaults there. There were enemy vehicles involved in the attacks. According to reports, many of them were destroyed, including both heavy armor, such as armored personnel carriers and infantry fighting vehicles, but also at least one of the infamous Russian Golf buggies that they seem to use for troop transports. Now, apart from that, we also have some updates from the defenders themselves. Let me quote from Nazar Voloshin, the spokesperson for the Khortytsia Operational and Strategic Group of Forces. Now, what he said was the situation in this sector is certainly changing dynamically. There are cases when the enemy partially achieves limited tactical success in certain areas due to intense shelling, and sometimes our defense forces are recapturing lost positions and returning to them. So the situation is, as always, dynamic. It's a lot of back and forth, really. There were also additional reports that Ukrainian forces are no longer suffering from the same amount of shell shortage that they used to. Now, this obviously might be both due to the efforts of the Czech Republic, so the famous efforts to obtain artillery ammunition from regional countries, but also the fact that the supplies which are provided by the United States are slowly reaching the front lines. Not yet there, however, it is happening. So hopefully the situation might be improving later on, further down the line. However, in the meantime, the city of Kharkiv, and generally the Kharkiv region, is facing an intense pressure from the Russian forces. So let's go there now. Let's take a glance at what's going on in Kharkiv in particular. Now, we know that the situation has been very difficult indeed, especially of Vovchansk. Kharkiv itself also remains within the range of Russian fires. And it's not just long-range missiles. I mean, seeing how close to the border that is, even artillery can actually do some damage. And there are major fears that the Russians might be willing not just to capture the city, but first to turn it into rubble. And now they are testing this approach in Vovchansk. Vovchansk itself has seen an expansion of the area of active combat by the Russian forces by almost 70 kilometers. And they launched their offensive in the Kharkiv region. Ukraine's army chief Alexander Syrsky has confirmed this on Friday. Russians, he said, are concentrating their main efforts in the Streletsya-Lipsy sector, attempting to take Vovchansk and launch an offensive on the rear of Ukrainian forces. Now, the Russians launched their offensive well ahead of schedule, and they noticed the development of Ukrainian troops, the development and deployment in particular, but they failed to break through Ukrainian defenses. Again, this is going to be a story of back and forth, right? This is going to be also a story of attritional warfare. There were news of evacuation of people from Vovchansk, and naturally we'll be bringing you more updates as the situation develops. The Ukrainian forces are saying this is a difficult but stable situation. Nevertheless, warfare, as always, remains unpredictable. And now, let's take a glance at some images from the Ukrainian front lines, in particular from the Kharkiv region. And now it's time to take a look at the situation from a journalist's perspective. Joining me now is Os Kateji, our correspondent in Kiev. Hello, Os. Good to see you again.
Hello.
So there has been a lot happening. The Russian offensive against Kharkiv, the blackouts across the country. But we'll be focusing on one particular event, namely the visit of the US State Secretary Antony Blinkin in Kiev. What has been the general assessment of this visit? Was there a degree of disappointment? Because I did notice some commentators saying, look, we would have liked to see not only assurances, but also some specific aid packages, for example, and instead we got, well, a rock concert of all things.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think Blinken, for his part, is only able to announce what the government that he's representing is able to announce. And there was a new aid package announced in this trip. But I do think that performance, while not wide, it's not universally not accepted. There were some people here in Ukraine, in Kyiv in particular, who found that it was a bit distasteful to be playing a song in a club when what's happening in Kharkiv in particular is going on right now. It did leave some people with a bit of a bad taste in their mouth, you could call it. But look, there was a further $2 billion aid package, military aid package that was announced. I mean, one of the bigger things that happened again is there was this discussion about whether Ukraine can use Western weapons, American weapons in particular, to target Russian forces inside Russia.
That's a crucial question, isn't it?
Yeah,
I mean, some people said, of course, that, you know, we would have wanted more heavy metal on this concert. Of course, there was a particular meaning in there. But also, we would like this heavy metal to reach audiences in Russia. Now, Americans seem adamant that, no, you can't use our weapons there, which is a paradox, isn't it? I mean, it's a paradox that we've seen from the very start of the war. Ukraine, you're supposed to win this conflict, but also fight with one hand tied behind your back. I mean, when will that end? Many people are asking.
Well, I do think it's important to note that this is the American position, whereas it's not necessarily the British position. And there are other.
That's an excellent point.
In Europe who have slightly different opinions. The Germans are a lot closer to the Americans on this. Now, again, Lloyd Austin had sort of indicated that there was a loosening of this. Blinkin indicated there was some sort of loosening of this policy, but the State Department has reiterated it. So, there is going to be a continuous back and forth. And as we see, Ukrainians aren't waiting for the American permission. Just yesterday, there was another. Overnight, there was another attack on Russian positions inside Russia. And these are coming from Ukraine's native drone program. They're building their own drones, which they're using inside Russian territory. So they're not using American weapons to do that. However, Kiev has already stressed that they want the ability, they want the permission to be able to strike inside Russian territory using all of the weapons that they have. And this will be, continuously a point of disagreement between Kyiv and Washington for as long as this goes on for.
But it's a smart move on the part of Ukraine. I mean, first thing that they have managed to actually ascertain is, well, Crimea is Ukraine. So using ATACMS against Russian targets there is fine. But also, Ukrainians seem to have developed drones which can travel for distances exceeding that of any Western weapons provided to them so far by a long margin. I mean, the latest reports suggested that the refineries in Russia that were attacked lie more than 1,000 kilometers away from Ukraine. None of the weapons, including ATACMS, that was provided to the Ukrainians so far could even reach that, right? Even halfway through, these weapons would simply crash.
So yes, this is true. This is kind of like the Ukrainian equivalent of the Russian manufactured now Iranian Shahed drone. So it is true that Ukraine is now producing drones similar to the ones that Russia has been using to target Ukraine. The issue is that these weapons don't have very large payloads. So they could do immense damage against a target that has fuel in it, like a fuel depot, but it would have very little impact, say, if they were trying to damage the Crimean bridge with a weapon like that. The payload is just too small. And also, these are quite slow moving, so they can get shot down by Russian air defense quite easily. So the point is to make lots of them cheaply and send as many as they can, which is basically, these are the same tactics that Russia's been using. So Ukraine has been adapting its tactics, learning from the Russians, learning to use their own techniques against them, particularly trying to cripple Russian oil refineries and oil production facilities by using these Ukrainian-made, Shahed-inspired drones with small payloads that are quite slow-moving.
But that's, in a way, another bone of contention, isn't it? I mean, the Americans are saying that they are not particularly keen on Ukraine attacking these oil depots and refineries deep inside Russia with any weapons because they are worried about the oil market. Has there been any indication that this particular policy might be relaxed from either Mr. Blinkin or any other officials? Because this seems to be another absurd limitation on the Ukrainian armed forces.
I mean, look, the way that the Americans or the Biden administration will see this is that inflation is bad news for them. Higher inflation means bigger difficulties going to the public in an election year. And I think the Americans are quite concerned about a potential, right, when I say the Americans, I think the Biden administration is quite concerned about the potential damage a Trump administration could do, particularly when it comes to Ukraine. So from their perspective, arguing, being an advocate of the devil, as it were, they would argue that, look, this might be good for you short term, but longer term, this may come back to bite you. That's not a position that necessarily I agree with, but and look, the most important thing to be said about this is it's definitely not a position that Kiev agrees with. And as you can see over the last few days, Ukraine has been bombarding Russian oil facilities as they have continued to do. Their campaign against what they see as a critical component of the Russian war machine goes on. whether people in Washington have a problem with this or not, it doesn't seem to be factoring into Ukraine's strategy on this.
Indeed, some people have referred to this as the only sanctions that have practically managed to make a change when it comes to the Russian oil production capacity. Sanctions applied in practice. Oz Kataji was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us here on Ukraine this week.
Thank you, Jonas.
As Russian troops advance on all fronts in Ukraine, China's leader Xi Jinping rolled out the red carpet for Vladimir Putin in Beijing in a strong show of unity. Putin was given a guard of honor by the People's Liberation Army, and the two sides came out with a statement pledging a new era of partnership.
The visit marks Putin's first official trip abroad since securing his fifth presidential term earlier this year. During the meeting, both leaders asserted their mutual commitment to what they called a political solution to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. The leaders emphasized their stance during a joint press conference, positioning themselves as proponents of a multipolar world order. Both leaders refrained from explicitly terming the situation in Ukraine as a war, opting instead to refer to it as a crisis. On the second day of the visit, Putin toured the state-backed Harbin Institute of Technology, a university famous for its cutting-edge defense research, highlighting how economic and military ties between the countries have grown. Putin's visit comes weeks after U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinkin flew to China to raise concerns about China's support for Russia's military. That trip appears to have done little to dent Xi's deepening relationship with Putin. While China and Russia are not formal allies committed to defend each other with military support, their armed forces have worked together more closely in recent years.
普京表示，中国发展势不可挡。
By picking China for his first foreign trip since being sworn in this month for another 6-year term, Putin is sending a message to the world about his priorities and the strength of its personal ties with Xi.
And now it's time to explore this issue in depth. Joining us now is Yulia Mendel, Ukrainian journalist, contributor for the New York Times, Politico Europe, the Atlantic Council, Vice, Spiegel Online and Forbes. She's also a political advisor, former spokesperson for the President of Ukraine, and the author of the book The Fight of Our Lives, My Time with Zelensky, Ukraine's Battle for Democracy and What It Means for the World. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you for having me.
So the China visit, now this has had many accounts on social media gushing over this multipolar world. In particular, many of the supporters of both Xi Jinping and Putin were elated over pictures of their bear hug. But beyond that, is it really the case that these two countries are likely to walk hand in hand, or are there any differences, in particular differences, that the West could still exploit?
Well, definitely the relations between Moscow and Beijing today in a hot spot, because these are two huge autocracies that try to influence the world order that we all have agreed upon after the World War II. But I would not overestimate what propaganda from Russia or China is trying to show us. Let me say that definitely Putin was trying to demonstrate his image as a welcomed and recognized leader, which he tries to show himself after being re-elected for a fifth time as the president of Russia. So definitely he wants to show that he maintains the support of China as one of the hugest economies around the world. But let me just say that China has never been that superficial. And in this particular case, we understand that Xi Jinping is in much stronger position, because this is Moscow who depends on Beijing in terms of economy, in terms of businesses. And this is Beijing who dictates today's relations with Russia. The most concerning part here is that China is selling to Russia dual-use products, which can be used, parts of each can be used for weapons production.
That is the main problem there, isn't it? And that's something that the West would like to stop. But does it have any leverage over China in this regard? Because we know that China might be driven by economic interests. It doesn't really need much from Russia except for raw materials, oil and gas. But it has a lot to offer to Vladimir Putin. And Putin clearly wants it. These components will allow him to lead this genocidal war for a long time, unless China is persuaded to change its course. But can it be persuaded? What leverage could we use, if any?
Well, let me just say that there have already been influence of sanctions. Last December 2023, we saw that China sold Russia these dual-use products for the amount of $600 million. Today, this amount was reduced to $300 million. It's already, twice reduction of these materials. At the same time, it's still a huge number. And, this is a precedent that is very sad to the world, and this is the most concerning for the Western part of the world, because China tries to show that precedent when an autocratic country invades another independent country, committing huge war crimes and destructing the country's infrastructure and economy is actually all right and something that can be accepted. And I think
they are normalizing invasion
to leave itself some kind of a loop for perhaps potential future action for itself.
So, on the one hand, there is this normalization of violence, right? There is this idea that if this is actually something that the West could accept or at least could become acquiescent about, then later on, perhaps, for example, a military action in Taiwan would not attract as much opprobrium as it otherwise could have. But also, we have this idea of China being the sort of peace broker. How realistic is that? There are many people who are skeptical, including a well-known Chinese dissident and cartoonist Buddy Cao, who has recently published an absolutely stunning image of Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping releasing the Dove of Peace. However, the Dove of Peace is dead. It's just a flying skeleton. Do you think this is actually an accurate depiction of what this potential peace deal could be about?
Well, I definitely know that Ukrainian authorities today are really looking forward for the agreement of China to participate in the peace platform that is going to happen, to be launched in Switzerland in June. At the same time, we see that, China is playing this double game, and we understand that the most important fact, China is not looking for a just peace. It feels like if China is looking for a peace deal that can be beneficial more for Russia, and that we are not talking about any kind of justice here. So in this case, we're talking that China perhaps could agree for the annexation and occupation of Ukrainian territories on the level where it is. And this is very much concerning. Let me just say that Russia tries to legitimize autocracy as a potential alternative to democratic way of ruling. This is the major question, if Beijing is joining Russia in this case, or Beijing will try to show that it has power and it can contribute to a real peace in the region.
So for the time being, I mean, the moves being made by China, they are working both ways. Like, there is this rhetorical drive towards a peaceful resolution. On the other hand, the talks with Vladimir Putin. So do you think that in the end, China may behave pragmatically in this regard? And is it a good thing? Because one could come to a conclusion that pragmatically they have more to gain by supporting Russia rather than siding with the West. If they are, not just an authoritarian country, but also a revisionist one, a revisionist power, then it is in their pragmatic interests for the world order to begin to crumble and not to uphold it by basically...
Is this a smart question? Sorry, this is such a smart question, because if, in fact, China tries to demonstrate itself as a very pragmatic country, but if China were pragmatic, in fact, the market of the EU and the market of the United States is much bigger than Russia, and Russia is actually a huge load on the shoulders of China, because in fact China needs to contribute with so many things to try to make Russia somehow alive in this huge economic isolation that Russia exists in. So that's why, China doesn't play one game, but double game, and in fact, preserving huge autocratic roots and preserving itself a chance for potential future invasions. China, at the same time, tries to play the Western game and tries somehow to show that here I am, I'm influencing Vladimir Putin, I am influencing Russia, and maybe potentially I can somehow influence to the finishing of this war. But in fact, Ukraine is concerned that the peace that China has in mind is not going to be just, and in fact is going to strengthen this precedent of legalization of invasion of independent countries and occupation of the territories.
So one quick question. How much do you think is likely to change if the US elections come and go and we have a new, different president? Donald Trump is known for being very vocal about China. Even recently he made comments about this, saying that this is a threat, that Putin and Xi Jinping are talking to one another and, expressing friendship and all that. But he's also known for this transactional approach to politics. Would a transactional approach help in this situation, or would it make the situation even worse?
I don't think that the statements that Donald Trump is making right now actually show the way that he will be acting when he becomes the president. As a political advisor, I definitely separate a candidate during electoral period and a president who takes the power. Donald Trump has not been very consistent in doing the things that he promised to do, and actually to acting in a way that he tries to show that he's building his electoral campaigns in. I think that Donald Trump would like to show that he is a strong leader, and up to now, it is a huge scale of things that we can have in mind of guessing how it will look like for him. If he would like to support Ukraine at that moment and follow the Republican agenda by giving us enough weapons, or he would like to support Russia, or, it's very difficult right now to predict what Donald Trump will be doing. I have been to Washington and I have been talking to the people who are close to the candidate, and I think that the major idea will be, if there is any interest in our country, on more pragmatic way, as you can say, not on just idealistic way, but it's very difficult to say right now who is going to win in these elections. I definitely know that any candidate who is going to have a battle in the United States is paying attention to the independent electorate, and I saw that independent electorate is staying right now in the United States on the terms of finishing the war in Ukraine.
So with Trump, it's plenty of speculations, right? Donald Trump recently said, Vladimir Putin, I know him well. Xi Jinping, I know him well. But can we say, Donald Trump, I know him well? Not necessarily. There is still a lot of mystery, surrounding his future plans. In any case, Yulia Mendel
no
was
one
our
knows
guest.
Donald Trump.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Yulia Mendel was a guest here on TVP World today. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your expertise.
Thank you.
Russia has launched a new offensive in the Kharkiv region. Moscow's troops have managed to gain ground fairly quickly, while the Ukrainian side has dismissed the commander responsible for the region's defense. Heavy battles are ongoing, although the front line seems to have stabilized, at least for now.
The past week witnessed Russian forces swiftly crossing the border, seizing control of a dozen villages and initiating a fresh front. Intense street battles have ensued, prompting the evacuation of thousands of residents.
They are shooting from everywhere. Yesterday there was a hit and the front of our house burned down. Then the house opposite, a bit further away, caught fire. 4 or 5 other houses. Smoke, smoke, smoke everywhere. A nightmare. Very bad.
Russian forces have advanced several kilometers, getting closer to the city of Kharkiv itself. While Ukrainian forces have managed to hold the main Russian push, there are fears that the conflict could spread to new settlements. The most intense battle is taking place on the outskirts of Vovchansk, once home to 17,000 people.
There is constant shooting. The enemy is trying to enter the town. There are fire exchanges at the northern outskirts of the town. Our armed forces, bless them, keep pushing the enemy away, but the town is being devastated by guided bombs, artillery and mortars.
Amidst growing concerns over the vulnerability of Ukraine's second-largest city, Kiev and its allies have been showing cautious optimism in their ability to prevent further territorial losses, encouraged by the expectation of forthcoming US military aid.
No, the Russians don't have the numbers necessary to do a strategic breakthrough. We don't believe. More to the point, they don't have the skill and the capability.
Meanwhile, Russian President Vladimir Putin has disclosed his intention to establish a buffer zone for the embattled border regions, indicating a strategic maneuver rather than all-out territorial conquest. But the reality for the people on the ground is grim, and whether it's a strategic maneuver or not, it's yet another escalation in the war causing death and destruction.
And joining us now to discuss this grim reality, but also the prospects for further situation on the front lines, not just in Kharkiv, is Alexander Kitz, a reporter with the Kiev Independent. He covers Ukraine's foreign policy, alleged abuse of power in the country's military leadership, and reports on the Russian-occupied territories. Alexander is the European Press Prize 2023 winner, the All for Jan Award 2023 winner, and Ukraine's 2022 National Investigative Journalism Award finalist. His works were also published in the Washington Times and Atlantic Council. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So President Volodymyr Zelensky has recently made it clear what would be needed to make the situation much better for the embattled city of Kharkiv. 2 Patriot systems. Do you think that this is a lot for the West to provide? I mean, given the inventory of these systems that America has on its soil, arguably, but transporting them over the sea probably wouldn't be that difficult. Shouldn't we, as the public opinion, expect them to deliver these 2 systems and help the people of Kharkiv?
Definitely, this system is supposed to be in Ukraine and not in somewhere in a garage in whatever military base in the European Union or in the United States. Why 2 Patriots? Because such an amount could technically repel Russian aircrafts dropping those glide bombs, like destroying the borderland, the strip near the Russian border, and of course Kharkiv itself, the second major city in Ukraine.
Are you feeling reassured about what one of the top NATO commanders said recently, that Russia doesn't have the capacity for any sort of strategic victory? Wouldn't this mean that perhaps Russia, doesn't have the ability to walk in, conquer the city, but it still does the capacity to make the lives of hundreds of thousands of people a misery on an everyday basis and wreak a total destruction among Ukraine's second biggest urban center, because this, unfortunately, does not require such a massive manpower. It does require a few missiles and bombs, and unfortunately seems to be within Putin's grasp.
True. So far, Russia deployed around 50,000 troops to make their kind of invasion of Kharkiv Oblast in the border area around and in Vovchansk. which sits just like 5 kilometers away from the Russian border, to conduct a big offensive, kind of to encircle Kharkiv or to capture this one of the major cities in Ukraine. Russia needs at least maybe 300,000, or like up to 500,000 its troops, and not to spread them along the Kharkiv Oblast border with Russia, but near the neighboring Sumy Oblast as well. And but both those regions, they are heavily fortified, and we see it in Vovchansk and around, of course, some of the places Russian forces did just break through since there were no fortifications, and the security kind of checkups are ongoing in the area right now, according to the Kharkiv Oblast governor. But the Sumy Oblast, and I've been recently there, seeing Russia with the naked eye, seeing her hearing the Russian drones and Russian aircrafts and so on. Sumy Oblast seems to be much more like fortified place, and the military Ukrainian military station there, they kind of expecting the Russian invasion for the Sumy Oblast. And after my trip over there, the Kirill Budanov, chief of Ukraine's military intelligence agency, he also said that he expects that Russia is start launching another ground invasion of Sumy Oblast. But still, as the top military commander of NATO said, Russia doesn't have such a big amount of people on the northern border and northeastern border of Ukraine to make this to achieve all the goals they want to achieve, making those invasions. But some of them, of course, are to disrupt the Ukrainian attention and Ukrainian military attention, first of all, from this eastern Donbass region. And so the Russia wants to kind of finish the occupying the Donetsk Oblast, making it kind of a small victory for them, envisioning that.
A propaganda victory, in other words. But also Russia is trying to disrupt the functioning of the energy system in Ukraine, unfortunately. So many blackouts across the country. But coming back to the Kharkiv region, what do you think is the biggest problem that Ukraine faces right now? Some people are saying it's the manpower. Some are criticizing the mobilization efforts. Others say it's more about the weapons deliveries, but the weapons are still not there. And once they get there, the situation could begin to turn around. So without obviously disclosing any sort of information which could be deemed confidential or detrimental to the defenders of Ukraine if disclosed, in a general sense, which of these two would you say is closer to the truth, manpower or equipment?
Equipment is definitely, because Russia, before launching any ground offensive, they like showering the area they are about to step in with the glide bombs, with missiles, and the equipment like air defense, as we've been spoken already about that. They could repel Russian aircrafts from dropping those glide bombs and other weapons also. And of course, but it's a combination of everything what is needed to achieve a victory and repel Russian forces from the Ukrainian territory itself. And of course, the manpower is a critical. Having such a kind of a big losses Ukrainian forces and Ukrainian army is causing right now, but Russia has unlimited amount of people, so they just can grab people on the streets and send them fighting here. Ukraine tries to minimize such of those, barbaric efforts, but still there are some. And anyways, manpower is also like in a constant shortage in Ukraine.
Of course.
Regarding the artillery pieces and artillery rounds, today was the only first day within the over 2 years of the full-scale invasion when Ukrainian authorities and Ukrainian military can report that so far there is no shortage of artillery rounds for you.
And this is good news. One quick question towards the end. We were often discussing the willingness of the West to perhaps intervene in some way. Emmanuel Macron has mentioned such a possibility, providing some sort of strategic ambiguity. But still, do you think it's a question of symbols? Like, people in the West may be told, look, this is the second biggest city of Ukraine. Can you imagine the Russian army walking in, murdering people, causing a mass displacement of a population? Or would they need a symbol? I mean, you know, if people imagine the same thing happening to Paris, they would say, oh no, we cannot allow this. But Paris has the Eiffel Tower, we need to do something. But I mean, this is irrational, isn't it? But it works on a symbolic level. Do you think that this can be overcome, and when a narrative can be created which will compel Western leaders to act if such a crisis begins? Hopefully it does not, but obviously this is something that has to be mentioned, and the West has a reputation to uphold, right?
Definitely, President Macron's statement was so powerful, like sending a signal to Russia. If you do like more atrocities than you do, and you keep on like raising to the ground the second biggest Ukrainian city, so we're gonna send troops. And recently there were reports that some of the NATO countries, they are considering sending military instructors to Ukraine for training Ukrainian troops closer to the front line, and also sending their military for the repairment works within the Ukrainian territories, so not to kind of spend a time to send this equipment somewhere to the West and then repair there and bring it back. So like to repair this hardware on the scene in eastern or southern Ukraine, somewhere near the front line. And it would definitely help. And I think at some point, such troops will be sent to Ukraine, and this is going to be the first step towards another step when they send in the ground troops like ready to fight, because like if Ukraine not withstand this war, it will encourage all the autocrats, not only Putin, to go further into Poland, into Baltic states, and so on, Taiwan, just you name it.
So that is a very important point, and it also ties into our earlier discussion concerning Xi Jinping. America and its allies need to watch this carefully, because if they allow Putin to win, or at least to pretend that he's winning, this will encourage, as you're saying, other autocrats to follow suit. Alexander Kitz was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight into the subject.
Thank you for having me.
And with this, we conclude this edition of Ukraine This Week. I'm Jan Śledziński. Thank you for watching, and please stay with us here on TVP World.